Good afternoon and welcome. We'll get started in about a minute or so. Start in about 15, 20 seconds. Let the last few people in. All right, good afternoon and welcome to the EDU Core Research Solicitations Last Minute Tips and Audience Q&A. This event is co-hosted by the ECR Hub and the National Science Foundation. My name is Danielle Ferguson and I am a co-PI on the ECR Hub. You can go to the next slide. The ECR Hub is a 5-year resource center funded through the National Science Foundation. It is led in partnership with American Institutes for Research, Georgia State University, Morgan State University, and Northwestern University. The goals of the ECR Hub are to extend the influence and reach of existing ECR investments and build career development opportunities, especially for underrepresented institutions and scholars. There are 3 target audiences of the ECR Hub. We work with current grantees, prospective grantees, and stakeholders in other NSF EDU programs. More specifically, we have a list of goals here on the screen. I won't read them all for you, but one of those goals includes working with NSF to provide opportunities such as this to give prospective grantees an opportunity to ask questions about developing NSF proposals. We also work with current grantees, as I said before, to consolidate and disseminate resources and also to synthesize the research, the current ECR research. And so I'll pass it over to program officers from NSF to lead the Q&A session.
Great, thanks Danielle, and welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Stybrook, and I'm a program officer in the Division of Research on Learning and a member of the ECR core team. And I will let my 2 colleagues introduce themselves as well. So Lori, you wanna go ahead?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Lori Takeuchi. I'm a program director for the ECR core program. I also do manage proposals for RITL and AZEL as well. Margaret.
Hi, I'm Margaret Helmarson. I'm the program lead for the EDU core research program. And I also work in the Division of Research on Learning, and I work as the lead for the career program as well.
Great. So our goal for today is really just to provide you with a few tips, but to have the opportunity to respond to your questions. So we're going to start where Lori and I are going to share some tips and last minute reminders, and then we will get right to your questions. So next slide, please. Thanks. So a key thing to keep in mind with the ECR core program is that ECR supports curiosity-driven and use-inspired fundamental research. And that's really the key, is that we're talking about fundamental research here that contributes to general explanatory knowledge that underlies STEM education. So in general, when you are kind of trying to weigh that out in your mind, you can think about it as it's different than some of our applied programs. Some of our applied programs might include like the DRK-12, the Discovery Research Pre-K-12 program. And those programs are much more, the findings have implications for practice. And oftentimes when we're talking about the core program, we're talking about research that's going to advance research literature. It's going to be grounded in theoretical or empirical frameworks that inform research questions, but it's not necessarily studies or research that's going to generate findings with immediate applications at the practical level. So that's kind of a key difference is it's, the findings are often distal from immediate practice relative to some of the more applied programs. Next slide, please. So ECR funds work in 3 different research areas. So STEM learning and learning environments, broadening participation in STEM, and STEM workforce development. So these are described in the solicitation, which if you haven't heard this on one of the webinars before, it's really, really important to read the solicitation because you'll get a lot more detail than you will from us right now. But you can kind of keep in mind these are like 3 large umbrellas or 3 large buckets, and we fund lots of different types of studies and lots of different topic areas within these 3 larger buckets. So when you get into the solicitation, you will likely have noticed that we have kind of an initial list of topics that we talk about. And this list is not exhaustive by any stretch, but just to give you some of the examples that we share in the solicitation. So we're interested in studies that advance fundamental knowledge related to diversity, equity, access, and inclusion in STEM education in the workforce. The cognitive and neural underpinnings of STEM learning, discipline-based education research in STEM fields, research on technology-enabled learning, advances in methods, measurement, and assessment in STEM education. So within these larger buckets, there's lots of topics that we talk about in the solicitation, but we're also interested in other topics that you think would fit within these different buckets. Next slide, please. So within an ECR proposal, so you have the opportunity to select one of 3 levels of funding. So you can see level 1 is up to 500,000, level 2 is up to 1.5 million, and level 3 is up to 2.5 million. And each of these projects can be 3 to 5 years for any of the particular levels. So, folks often ask like, well, what's the ideal budget number? And there really is no ideal budget number. So what we're looking for is we're looking for a budget that's aligned to the scope of work. So if you're in the early phases of things and you're proposing more of an exploratory, a smaller study, then we would expect to see a smaller budget to go with that. So you want to think about, identifying the scope of work for your project and then matching up the appropriate budget and duration of the project to that as well. Next slide, please. Oh, this is just my comment on the scope of work matching up. So all proposals, regardless of the research area, the level of funding, the duration, and this actually holds true, all proposals that come to NSF are going to be subject to the same merit review process and will be evaluated in terms of intellectual merit or the potential to advance knowledge and understanding, and broader impacts or the potential to benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes. So just to break those down a little bit for you, when you think about intellectual merit, and particularly you think about your ECR core proposal, some of the things that reviewers are going to be looking for is, is the proposed study grounded in theory? Are the research questions clear? Are the proposed methods appropriate for the research questions? So we do not have a methodological priority within ECR. So we don't want quantitative or qualitative. We want methods that are aligned to the research questions. So that's what reviewers are looking for. Reviewers in terms of intellectual merit are looking to see, is the research plan clearly described? So are the assumptions stated, the targeted population and sampling procedures, if you're doing a quantitative type study, the measures and the instruments, is it clear how the data is going to be collected and then how the data is going to be analyzed? If you're doing a mainly qualitative study, so does the proposal clearly explain how the data will be collected, coded, reduced, and analyzed? The conceptual frameworks underlying the analyses, the sampling procedures, how validity will be established. So these are the types of things that folks are looking for related to the intellectual merit of a proposal. A few kind of things to keep in mind with respect to the broader impacts. So folks are looking to see, is there a plan for broader impacts that makes sense given the type of project and the scope of a particular study? Is the team qualified to carry out these broader impacts? Do they have sufficient resources to do so? Are the structures in place? So those are some of the things that reviewers are thinking about when they are evaluating your proposals with respect to intellectual merit and broader impacts. Next slide, please. And I am actually going to turn it over to Lori here.
Cool, thanks, Jessica. So I'm going to dig a little bit more deeply into the nuts and bolts of the actual proposal preparation. So starting with the PAPPG. So we strongly suggest that in addition to, as Jessica said, closely reading the ECR solicitation, that you also take a look at NSF's 2024 Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. The PAPPG, as we like to call it, or PAPG, offers really detailed guidance on how to put your proposal together. So it's super long, it's very long, so we don't expect you to read the whole thing from start to finish, but there's a section specifically on proposal preparation and submission that nicely complements what you're going to read about in the ECR solicitation. Next slide. Okay, so what are the required elements of an NSF proposal? Everything's listed here very nicely. A project summary, a one-page project summary that summarizes the intellectual merit and broader impacts, as Jessica's just reviewed. A 15-page project description, references that you've cited, a data management plan, biographical sketches of all project personnel or senior personnel, a current and pending support documentation for all senior personnel, a budget and budget justification, a document describing the facilities, equipment, and other resources of your institution or institutions, letters of collaboration if you happen to have them. They're not required, but they're encouraged, and a mentoring plan for graduate students and postdocs, if again, only if applicable. So the PAPPG is going to provide a lot of guidance on what is expected of each of these components and how they should be formatted. All right, next slide. Okay, so Jessica just went through a bunch of these, but I'm going to reiterate. So, and again, these are all actually the elements of a successful ECR proposal. They're all really clearly listed in the solicitation. But to summarize, your proposal should include your justification for the idea or approach, a theoretical framework, a comprehensive lit review, clearly written research questions. And I have to emphasize that because it's amazing how many ECR proposals I get or I read that have no research questions clearly written out, what your data sources will be, a strong research design with appropriate methods and analysis, an effective dissemination plan, the expertise of your project team, the qualifications of your advisory board if you happen to have one, and what an external evaluator is going to do, again, if you are going to have one. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little time talking about budgets. In particular, some common pitfalls and red flags that reviewers and program officers often see in project budgets. So first, going for the maximum. Jessica alluded to this a little bit earlier. It's pretty easy to tell when PIs are asking for more than is necessary to conduct their research. So just because ECR allows for grants up to 2.5 million doesn't mean you should stuff your budget to hit this amount, okay? In fact, as clearly stated in the ECR program solicitation, quote, proposals that request the highest level of funding are particularly expected to discuss the need for resources. Another pitfall, and one that PIs often use to get the maximum out of NSF, is unnecessarily prolonging a project. Doing so is a really good way to keep an organization staffed over a longer period of time, but again, this really raises red flags. Reviewers and NSF staff will question whether, for instance, you really need that fourth year when all you've proposed can be completed in just 3. Next slide. Okay. Oh, I guess I forgot to go to the next slide. If anyone's all listed down. Yeah, got it. All right. So common So next slide, yeah. Another pitfall is that we really encourage you, or it's suggestion actually, that we really encourage you to keep equity in mind as you map out your budgets. So are you compensating your partners and participants fairly and on par with researchers involved in the project? And I think maybe there's another slide. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, they were bullets. Lastly, start working on your budget now, right? The deadline's a little bit more than a month away. Don't wait till the last day before the deadline because budgets are really complex. Their justifications require substantial explanation, and together they can take, several days, if not weeks, to pull together. Next slide. Okay, so to wrap things up, just a reminder that proposals must be submitted to research.gov or grants.gov. And if you need technical support on these sites, which happens pretty often, don't reach out to us ECR program officers because we are not going to be able to help you with the technical stuff. Email the help desks on either research.gov or grants.gov or call them on the phone because they are super helpful at getting your questions answered really quickly. They're very responsive. There's just rarely a delay in getting back to you. But again, if you're submitting at the last minute, there are going to be more people calling them for technical support. So again, it's just always a good idea to try to submit early. That's it from me. And now I guess we can turn it over to Margaret for the Q&A. Oh, sorry. And lastly, yeah, the deadline is October 3rd at 5 p.m., the local time of the submitter. So that's not NSF time, but for instance, if your institution is based in California, then that's going to be 5 p.m. Pacific time. And meanwhile, if you have any questions, feel free to email us at ecr@nsf.gov with any questions, but hopefully we'll be able to answer them today.
Yeah, 5 p.m. the institution's time. So if your grants person works in California, but your university is in Boston, it's going to be Boston time. Put it that way. Yeah. Okay, so there's a question about if their topic is relevant to more than one topic area, should you mention them all?
So my view on that is sure, doesn't hurt to mention them. It really helps us when you provide kind of that topic to understand what your primary goals are and where you fit. So if you think it's really, a combination of advances in methods, measurement, and assessment, as well as factors that affect STEM teaching, then I wouldn't see a problem in including both.
Yeah, in fact, we use that information to also help program officers create review panels, right? So if you think that you're doing a couple of different topics, then it gives us some flexibility to put you in either, a methods panel or on a early STEM learning panel. But again, just the more information, the better. And yeah, you don't have to pick just one.
But you can also just pick one. So that's the next question. Do you have to cover all 3 research areas? No, one is fine. One is plenty. Also. The right way to seek feedback on project summaries is to email ecr@nsf.gov. Make sure it says .gov. I saw an email today that was to nsf.org. I don't know who that is. So send a one pager there.
Can I just add, Margaret, that those emails will be responded to, and that the person who's in charge of that mailbox is going to make sure that you are matched with the most appropriate program officer to talk about your project. So don't be like, it's just going to this like generic email address. It's not. It's actually going to a person, and they're going to make sure that it reaches the program officer with the expertise that's really required to help you with your project idea.
Do we have to have an advisory board, or what are the external review options?
I can take this one. So that's really up to you and your project and what's going to be the most appropriate for your project. So what it says in the solicitation is that you have to have a mechanism to assess the success of your project. So In some cases, that's going to be an advisory board. So I saw another question was about thinking about people on an advisory board. This is something to be really thoughtful about, right? So if you are proposing something, let's say, to do with methods, development of methods, right? And you're going to test it out in math in middle school or something like that, making this up. Then when you think about building an advisory board, you want to think about someone who has the methodological expertise, someone who has the expertise in middle school education, somebody who has the expertise in math education. So really thinking about pulling together folks that are going to be able to provide help, assistance, evaluation of your project is part of what you're thinking about with that advisory board. In some cases, folks choose not to have an advisory board, and instead they have, an external evaluation. If that's most appropriate for the particular project that you are proposing, that is totally fine to do. So you really want to think about your project and what's going to help you be most successful in that project.
And a related question, there's a question about, do they have to be located in the US? Not necessarily. You just need to provide a little bit more explanation for why. There's some instructions about including international folks in the PAPG. So there's just a little more information you need to provide. Somebody asked if it was okay to be the only PI. Yes, you can. That's fine. What happens? This is a question that was submitted earlier. What happens when your proposal is between research areas? Like this one says research area 1 and research area 2.
So I would say don't kill yourself over this, right? It's okay. So it's okay if you can't get it, exactly right. Stay where you think it is. I think this really belongs in STEM learning and learning environments. And if we're reading it and we're like, oh, actually, I think it's a better fit over in broadening participation, that's not a big deal. We can move things around internally as we're putting together review panels, as Lori was talking about. But that's not a make or break for you. So do your best to put it into the home you think is most appropriate.
There's a question about examples of broader impacts for curiosity-driven projects. Could you provide examples of broader impacts? If seems like, if we're talking about designing a curriculum, you might say things like more people are using it, but in the case of ECR, any thoughts?
I would say just thinking about the downstream broader impact. So I think unlike some of the applied programs like DRK-12 or IUSE or ASIL, the Advancing Informal STEM Learning Program, there's an expectation that the broader impacts are going to be immediately, they're going to come as a result of immediately from the project, right? So that for instance, there will be a curriculum that will be made available to thousands of students around the country. That's for these more applied programs. But for ECR, the idea is that whatever research you're doing is kind of laying the foundation for broader impacts maybe later, right? So you're kind of doing this fundamental work that then will allow for the development of a curriculum or a product that will eventually have these broader impacts. So ECR, it can be more of a delayed broader impacts, but you still need to be able to articulate what they are. You do need to have a vision for what the broader impacts might be.
It can also be sharing things like if you're developing research tools or new research methods, those kinds of things can be broader impacts. Or if you're, I'll use the math example. I mean, maybe you're doing research and it has impacts for math education, but it might have impacts for research on equity in schools more generally. So I think about not just the direct impact of your research questions, but what are the different fields that might be interested in some of the findings. Okay. Are immediate broader impacts still valuable? Sure. We're interested in all of the broader impacts. Whatever, whatever broader impacts you have, we're
Yeah,
interested.
for sure.
And we're interested in how people are sharing their work with multiple audience.
Yeah, you do have to have a dissemination plan, and often that's part of the broader impacts. You have to describe how you're getting the knowledge that you're generating out into the world, or to other researchers who would be able to use your methods as well, or right. So that's often thought of like a one thing that we evaluate broader impacts is sort of in that dissemination communication plan.
There's a question about what are common mistakes good proposals made that failed, that were fatal. It's in the chat window.
Oh, in the chat window.
Common mistakes.
So I think a common mistake would be lack of detail in your research plan. So there's really good idea, right? It's a really good idea, but it's not clear how you are going to investigate that. So it's not clear, you know, who your target population is and how you're selecting your sampling frame from that target population. And after you collect the data, what type of data are you collecting and how are you going to analyze that data? So, you know, reviewers are looking to see that you're going to be successful in your project. And so they want to see a well laid out research plan. You know, I often think of it as like a dissertation proposal, right? The proposal tells you exactly what you are going to do. And so that's what, you know, this type of proposal is doing. It's you're making a plan for how you're going to address the research question. So the more specific and detailed you can be in that plan, the better understanding reviewers will have of what you are trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we get a ton of really good ideas, like really brilliant ideas. No one's ever thought of them before, but those are not going to get funded unless we know that you can successfully execute them through a very clear research plan. And as Jessica says, this is probably the most common thing that we see is just a lack of detail around your research plan.
And sometimes I would say people start with the introduction way too broad. You can start at, you can imagine that somebody familiar with STEM education research is probably reading your proposal. So you can get pretty close into, if the issue is math education, start talking about the math education issues. You don't have to talk about the whole landscape of STEM education. You know, get close to the topic that you're focusing on relatively quickly in the proposal. I would say also use your references wisely. That helps reviewers understand what literature you're situating yourself in. It can help them have some confidence in the methods where, you know, if you don't have room to provide quite all the detail, you're giving them hints that you've done your homework about what your methods are. Because we know it is only 15 pages. There's only so many things you can talk about. So use your references to help the reviewers and program staff understand more what you're doing.
Can I just add one more? This is kind of like this very obvious one is make sure that it's appropriate for ECR, because you could write just a wonderful proposal that has great research plan and all the things we've described we need, but then it's not actually appropriate for ECR. Like it may be more R&D. It's like, oh, this would actually be perfect for IUs. So just make sure that your project idea is really core research, basic research, and it's not R&D.
Yeah. There's a question about if you've had education research grants before, but you're not an education major, do you need to add education scholars as evaluators? I would say no. It just has to be people who have, I mean, make sure that you can demonstrate through your bio sketch. You get to submit that, you know, that you have the expertise you need. But we fund people in a lot of different disciplines, not just education. What are not appropriate? Not appropriate. I mean, the other thing is it has to be about STEM education. So if it's just about reading, it's not for NSF. You need to be able to explain that it's about STEM education. What else? Oh, are collaborative proposals treated the same way as regular proposals?
Yes. They're just another mechanism to, you know, how you want to submit the proposal. So for folks who may not be as familiar, you know, you kind of have a couple options. So you can submit a proposal, and then if you're working with, you know, say folks at a nonprofit or another institution, you may have subawards to those folks in order to work with them. That's perfectly fine. The other option is to come in as a collaborative grant. And so that would mean that each of the institutions or entities that you're working with are all submitting a proposal. So there's a lead organization, but the other institutions are also submitting a proposal, and that's known as a collaborative. So it could have, you know, multiple entities coming in. There's pros and cons to each of those. And so it really depends on your situation. And, you know, for individual situations, we'd be happy to, you know, if you send a one-pager to us and we have a phone call, we're also happy to talk about that, because it is, you know, it really depends on where you are and what's going to make the most sense.
Okay, so there's another question about whether an external evaluation is merited or how to position the advisory board. All NSF proposals, one of the merit review criteria is a mechanism for, I think they call it external feedback, mechanism for external feedback. And so with either of those options, you need to explain how you're getting feedback outside your project team, whether it's an advisory board or an evaluator. Other thoughts, Lori, Jessica?
I don't know. I mean, I guess the way that I like to, yeah, it really depends on your project. We don't require them. So, but maybe one way to think about it is if you're doing one of these really big grants where it's like a multi-year longitudinal study with like thousands of students, you might want to get an external evaluator to help you just keep track of that you're kind of keeping things on track, because it's a really big project. It might be easier for an external person to actually help you with that as opposed to an advisory board, right? Think about how you might use an advisory board. They're going to be doing different things than an evaluator might do. They might provide you more with advice, or you could come to them with data and, you know, get their feedback on it, right? It really depends. Some projects have both. But all projects need to have one or the other.
International, there's a question about international collaborators. I can't remember if they can be co-PIs. There's a way to set that up. They can get sub-awards to an international institution, but yeah, look at the proposal and award guide for full.
Yeah, I think you have to justify why this international organization is the only one in the whole wide world that can do that work. But again, I think it's specified in the PAPBG how they can be involved.
And the money can't go directly to the international
Right.
institution. It has to go to someplace in the US. How are funding decisions made after the review panel?
So this is a great question. And I would also encourage you to, if you haven't already, on the ECR Hub, there's some recorded webinars. And I think on the last one, actually, we talked quite a bit about what happens in the process of review. So I would encourage you to watch that. But basically, during a review panel, so the panel is making recommendations to program officers about the competitiveness of the proposals, right? So they're telling us they're highly competitive, not competitive. And we take those recommendations back, and as an ECR core team, we come together and we talk through the recommendations that we have from our panels. So those recommendations, along with thinking about portfolio balance and other factors, all come together. And then as program officers, we then take it to the next stage where we make recommendations about potential funding of awards to our division director. And again, notice I keep saying the word recommendations, right? Because these are recommendations all the way along. So it comes to the division director, and then our division director either will, agree with those recommendations. And if it's to fund, it would go to the Division of Grants and Agreements, at which point they are the funder within NSF. So they're the person who can change that from a recommendation to an award. And that's who you would actually receive an award from. If the recommendation to the division director and they concur with that is to decline, then you would receive an email with information about your decline, and you would have access to the reviews that were used as a part of that process. If you're not familiar with the process, I would encourage you to volunteer to review. So that is the best way to learn about the review process. We know it's a ton of work, we recognize that, but I also think it's a great learning opportunity, and it really gives you that behind the scenes understanding of, oh, this is what a review panel looks like. So just like, I think, Margaret, is the best thing to do to email to that ECR at NSF address, right? With a short CV, just a couple pages is great, and just a little brief bio about yourself. And then we can include you in our list of potential reviewers.
Yep. Okay. Oh, here's a question about project is designing an instructional framework, instructional material to teach a framework. How do they ask research questions instead of evaluation questions?
So on a question like this, for a very specific proposal, I would tell you to email us. So I don't think that this is something that, a general response is going to do real well for, but please send, your questions, your one pager, and then we would be happy to help you think about, is ECR Core the best fit, or is there a different program that maybe is a better fit for what you want to study?
Yeah. Submitted a grant this summer to the Science of Learning to another program. So can I submit a similar grant to both grant mechanisms? Is there anything to include if you submit grants to both?
So the short answer to that is you cannot submit identical proposals to both programs, because if you are, then you were automatically going to be sent that proposal back as a return without review. Yeah, so NSF just doesn't allow for duplicate proposals. And besides, ECR Core, even though you feel like the Science of Learning, the original proposal was a good fit for ECR Core, the goals and the priorities of Science of Learning are different from ECR Core. So you really do have to make some adjustments in order to bring it close to what ECR is expecting. So just keep that in mind. You do need to adjust, and we have our ways of really checking to make sure that we were not getting duplicate proposals, either between programs or year after year. Like if you're like, oh, I didn't get accepted this year, I'm going to submit it to ECR again next year. And if you just send us the same proposal, same thing, we're going to send it back and say, this is exactly the same as it was last year.
The other thing we'll look for is even beyond NSF. So we'll get a call maybe from Institute of Education Sciences if they have something that looks similar to something, because they'll get the same kind of current and pending document that NSF does. So we'll also look for other federal agencies, or they will contact us if they think something looks too similar. And sometimes we can sort out that it's different, but make sure they're different. If we're working in schools, are letters of, I think they mean letters of collaboration required?
I think Lori mentioned this, not required, but encouraged. So if you are able to demonstrate that you have partners in place, that's always a good sign, right? Again, it goes down to feasibility of your project. Reviewers want to know that you can execute this project. So if you are, able to get letters of collaboration, not letters of support, but just using the template, if you go to the PAPPG, you will find that, then sure, it's helpful to include those.
Okay, I'm going to skip down to one about what's a typical review panel, like who reads ECR core proposals?
Well, I think as I mentioned earlier, we first start by, we read through everybody's one-page project summaries so that we know what each proposal is about. And we sort all the ECR program officers sort these proposals into panels that we think kind of a panel of a set of proposals that we think hang together. And depending on the program officer, some program officers like to include 20 proposals in a panel. Some of them like to include 10. It really kind of depends on the program officer, but in short, these proposals are grouped by a certain, focus area. So say it's early STEM, early informal STEM. We'll make it even more specific. So say I get a batch of 10 proposals that are about on those topics, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to read through or skim through all of the proposals to see what types of expertise are needed on these, the STEM subject area, on the methods that are used, and on a variety of other elements. And in fact, I myself come up with a spreadsheet, and I have all the proposals listed, and I put all the components of expertise that are going to be required to fairly review all the proposals on this particular panel. And so say I have a panel of 10 proposals, I will probably enlist 5 or 6, maybe probably 5 panelists with the necessary constellation of expertise required to review all of those proposals. And if there's if there's an outlier proposal in that there's like one particular area of expertise that is so different from the rest, then I will also enlist what's called an ad hoc reviewer. And the ad hoc is only going to read that particular proposal so that they don't have to read all these other proposals that they may not have expertise on or whatever. Yeah, and so in that way, we're just really, this is, as a program officer, this is one of the most challenging, and I say fun, but it's really challenging to pull together a set of panelists that are really going to do this set of proposals justice. And if I can't make it happen, then I'll swap a proposal with a fellow ECR program officer, because there may be a better fit for this particular proposal on a different panel. So that's how I do things, but we all do things differently. So Jessica and Margaret, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
That's about right.
Yep, I was working on this today and doing the exact matrix thing that you were talking about, Lori. I mean, it's like putting a puzzle together, because our goal is to give, fair reviews to all of these proposals. And so it really is a balance of expertise that we're pulling in.
Okay, especially since Jessica's here, is developing and validating a measure suitable for ECR? Could be considered fundamental, but could be a practical tool for instructors and researchers.
Yeah, great question. And I think again, I'd encourage you to send a one-pager. I'd be happy to talk with you about that. But I do think it depends on what the primary goal of the project is. So there certainly are measurement development projects that are funded by ECR Core, and there are measurement development projects that are funded by DRK-12. So it really depends on the framing of the project. And so I would encourage you to send a one-pager. We'll have a conversation to try to figure out which is the best fit. So I think you also want to think about it in terms of the goals that you have, right? Which of these is going to be most aligned with your goals?
There's been a couple questions about a funding rate. We don't publish funding rates by program. There's a general NSF funding rate, so we don't have details and about funding based on competitive level. The funding decision is primarily about the quality of the project. So align the budget to the project. That's our advice if you are hoping to get funded. Let's see. Data code, oh, similar. So would data code and measure sharing for a quantitative study be in the broader impacts or the data management plan, or both? I kind of think some of both usually.
Yeah, I agree, Margaret. I agree. How you're going to share data and things is often something that comes in your data management plan. But when you're talking about what data you're going to collect, how you're going to collect it, that's going to come in the narrative for your proposal.
So there's a question about the postdoctoral mentoring plan. Okay, and here I want to note that Lori mentioned that it's now the postdoctoral and graduate student mentoring plan. So you'll see in the new PAPG, it's just called the mentoring plan, and you need to talk about postdoctoral researchers and the graduate students. This is a new thing. So if you just have graduate students and no postdocs, you still need to submit one. I think what I look for is it tailored to the project? Are you talking about the resources at your institution that are available for mentoring postdocs or mentoring graduate students? What else do you look for? Or do you think reviewers look for?
So I will say that I've had so many panels where the reviewers are like, this is such a generic plan. Like it doesn't talk specifically about what they're doing like it's just copied and pasted from some other grant proposal. It should be really specific to the skills and competencies that these postdocs or grad students can get from your project. So just make sure that it's customized.
Mm-hmm.
And one more thing, I think engaging them in meaningful ways, right? So engaging them and giving them the opportunity to participate in the research activities, to take leadership roles as they continue to grow.
Yeah, professional development, networking, letting them travel. It's not just the PIs are going to conferences and publishing, those types of things, participating in grant preparation stuff. Yeah, it's their growth as scholars, not just their growth just doing research.
Mm-hmm. Okay, what's NSF's position on AI utilization in the research?
So position, I mean, I mean, the other part of this question, there's an increasing interest in AI to code data. So yeah, so there are lots of grants that come in that are using all kinds of AI tools to do the hard work of the data processing. So yeah, we encourage that. But so this is so I tend to manage a lot of these AI projects and technology projects. And this is one realm where we do tend to see more R&D projects come in then, right? So what many PIs do is they have a project and it's about developing the tool or the methods to do this type of work, or the technology or whatever, the AI-based whatever it is. And they're asking questions around whether that works or not. And you just have to be careful because what should really be happening is if you're creating, so for instance, you're working on a, I don't know, like a chat bot kind of thing, right? And there's some use of a generative AI or large language models or whatever. The research questions need to be on the learning that's going to take place around these tools that you're developing. It should not be whether or not these things work. So I kind of went off on a tangent, but just to be careful about any of these like technology or AI related projects. This is where we do tend to see more R&D projects come in.
Yep. Any advice on effective synthesis projects? I don't know that I have a lot that's different, but Jessica has handled a lot of these.
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is that there's likely to be two kind of buckets of reviewers that are looking at synthesis projects, right? So there's the reviewers who have the content expertise, and then there's the reviewers who have the methodological expertise. So before getting to the methods, you have to show that this topic warrants a synthesis project, right? And so there are going to be reviewers who are really familiar with that literature base. And so you want to be able to provide a compelling rationale for the need for a synthesis project. So I think that's the first piece that makes a really successful synthesis project. And the second piece is that research plan. So, you know, we have various types of synthesis projects that we fund, and I'll also put a plug in here. We also have a few institutes that we fund on qualitative metasyntheses and quantitative metasyntheses. And so I would encourage you, if you're interested in going the synthesis route, to take a look, and I can put it in the chat because I'm throwing this one on Joni. She might not have it, but to take a look at these institutes, because they are all about the methods and how do we think about doing, you know, a different, whatever your type of synthesis is that you are proposing. And so I would encourage you to look to those institutes because a strong research plan is crucial in those projects.
There was a related question in some of the questions people submitted previously that asked about whether syntheses and conferences can be embedded in a larger project that has other components. And I think, yes, like sometimes people will do more like a systematic review maybe as a first step. So you can, or a conference, or I've had conversations with people. This is where it's important to think about what does NSF mean by a conference. And so sometimes people have come in with ideas and I'm thinking, oh, you want each person coming to this conference to do some research at their own site. That sounds more like a multi-site research project in which there might be a meeting or some kind of convening. So I don't know that NSF would call it a conference. So this is a good space to sort of to send in a one-pager. But we encourage syntheses and conferences. They're interesting ways to convene people, get landscapes of the field. But anything else you two want to answer?
I would encourage, there was a question about if reviewers' comments are split, how do we reconcile the differences? So Joni also put a link in the chat to the webinar that we did a couple weeks ago. Oh no, I was declined. What do I do now? Responding to declination. So I would definitely encourage you to watch that webinar as it gives a lot of tips on thinking about split reviews and kind of addressing feedback.
Yeah. I'd say sometimes even if one person gave it an E and somebody else an excellent and somebody else gave it a good, sometimes their text that they write is similar. They have similar, even if they rated it differently. So I would pay attention to the text. If their split is something like, I loved your interview protocol, I hated your interview protocol, then you've got a different problem. But like I would say pay attention to the text, pay attention to the text of what they're saying.
Yeah, and you can also look at the panel summary, right? So the panel summary is where the panel actually discusses these things. So Yeah, sometimes in discussion, the reviewers come to some, I don't want to say consensus, but they may decide that it's actually one or the other. So be sure to look at all of these things together, the individual reviews and the panel summary. The panel summary will help provide some context around the individual reviews too, perhaps. But watch the webinar because like we deal with that question pretty specifically.
Other questions? I'm looking at this list. We're about 5 minutes from the end. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
How far? Yeah, I will say it for the 100th time. If you have questions about whether something's a fit or not, send us an email. Like if you're not sure if it fits within STEM education, send us an email before you do all the work of writing a proposal. Send us an email and we can usually answer that question pretty quickly. Send us a one-pager. The sooner you can send us a one-pager, the better. Some kinds of feedback is not going to be helpful to you a week before the deadline. So the sooner you get those one-pagers in, the better. And the biggest thing there might be, our advice might be, we have a different program. And we have lots of different programs and the programs change and evolve. So sometimes the program officer might have some program that you might not even know about. That could be a home for it. I think we answered all the stuff.
I think so. All right, so thank you all. Thank you so much for attending. We do have a exit survey or an event survey. Joni posted it in the chat, and we look forward to your submission.
Yeah, it really helps us to make sure that the webinars that we're doing are really meeting your needs. So please, it's like a minute. It takes like a minute to fill out. So thank you for doing that.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.